Sky, your word for happiness is resilience. Tell me a little bit more about this.
Well, I think, resilience I've seen in all the people that I interview, that the ones that are the happiest are the ones that have this power to look at anything and figure out a way to find that happy moment. And I'm often reminded of Rachel Wignon, who, when I interviewed her, one of the things that she said was she knew that something good was going to happen, and it may not happen that day. It might be the next day or the day after, but inevitably something positive was going to happen. And I think that is part of resilience, is having that sense where you know that something's going to happen. It may not happen right at that moment. And just how do you get through some of those moments? I think it's looking at the bigger picture. And I'm, also reminded of some of the people in, the Lives Will Live film that experienced some horrible things because of World War II, but somehow they were able to make it through and be very positive people. And I think, again, it's about your attitude. And I'm reminded of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he was a Holocaust survivor. He wrote about the fact that he could not predict who was going to make it through based on their physical strength. It was really about their attitude. And what that made me realize is that really the only thing we have control over is our attitude. And once you realize that, there's so many times in our lives where we can't control the things that are happening around us, but what we can control is our attitude about how we deal with those things. And so I think that resilience and that attitude, that positive attitude, kind of go hand in hand with happiness. And I'm reminded of Lucky Louie. My favorite quote from him was, "Happiness is a state of mind. You can be happy with what you have or miserable with what you don't have. You decide." And, again, that's that power of our attitude and our positive thinking that makes us either happy or miserable. We decide.
Tell us a little bit more about Mochisuke.
Yeah, well, Mochisuke is a Japanese tradition of bringing in the new year by making mochi. And if you don't know what mochi is rice that's steamed and cooked and then pounded until it's a paste like a bread dough texture and then formed into mochi balls. The film came about because one of the people in the Lives Will Live film, Susie Edo Bauman, who is Japanese American and was interned during World War II, had told this amazing story about her life. After we were done with the interview, she said, "Oh, my family's doing this Mochisuke next week. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I saw this amazing ceremony where 150 people gathered at that ceremony, all different ages. So you have grandparents and grandkids and everybody in between coming together to make food. And I just love that tradition that goes into that, because I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen. So I love this idea of the passing down of wisdom and knowledge and love through cooking together and through those shared stories that happen as we're making food together. And I think everyone can think about some food that you made as a family or with a group that you got together on a yearly basis. And so I love this passing down of tradition. But the film itself is also about the Japanese American experience as told through Mochisuke. So even when Japanese Americans were interned during World War II, they still figured out a way to make mochi, which I think is amazing. They figured out a way to make the bowls, the usus that they needed, and the hammers and everything. I mean, it just was amazing to me, the resilience of being able to continue to do that process, because that was their way of having some hope, and that was their way of marking time. It was the week usually before Christmas and New Year's, and it was a way to bring in the new year, and that meant hope and resilience. It's so layered, that story, so I'm really excited about it.
And you have another one, the Primetime Band, as well.
Yeah, the Primetime Band came about because I was a band geek when I was a kid. I played flute, clarinet, and bassoon, and I still play flute and guitar. I heard about this group in Santa Barbara, California, called the Primetime Band, and they rehearse every Tuesday night. They're about 75 people strong, and they're mostly made up of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even up to their 90s. They practice every Tuesday, and then they perform throughout the county. And it's just so wonderful, because I think all those things that I talk about and learned about from doing the Lives Will Live film and that I talk about in the book, from sense of purpose, resilience, community, all of those things show up in the Primetime Band. I mean, they obviously have this sense of community of the band because they get together every Tuesday. They care about each other. They know if somebody's not there, if somebody's sick, if something's happening. This sense of purpose because they come and they practice and they perform. That's a big deal for them. So they have this sense of purpose of coming together for this common good. And then I think this sense of resilience, it's not easy to remember how to play and to sight read the music. And then some of them have Parkinson's, or there's this one woman who can't hold a flute up anymore because her shoulder. And so she has a flute that you hold it down. They've come up with these amazing ways to continue to be resilient, to play their instruments. It would be so easy to say, oh, I can't do that. And instead, they have figured out, how can I still do this? Even if I don't play as well, how can I still be part of something bigger than myself? I absolutely love that story. In addition to that, part of the film is that many of the people that are in the band are part of a group called the Music Van, which is quite literally a van full of instruments that goes into third grade classrooms, and they introduce 8-year-olds to instruments, many of whom have never had the opportunity to even touch an instrument, nevertheless play an instrument. I love this cycle of older adults coming back to music later in life and paying it forward to young kids, introducing them to music, and who knows, maybe changing the course of their lives because they get to pick up an instrument at 8 years old and discover something totally new and different that they fall in love with.
That's an incredible story in itself. Music is definitely a connector. Definitely.
Music is universal.
You have your purpose. Where do you find that drive every day to say, you know what, it's time to tell the next story?
That's a good question. Again, it goes back to balance. I know that I love telling these stories, but I also know that I need time off every once in a while to regenerate and recuperate. And I think that that's important to recognize that. But I also think that it's partly because this is my passion. I love doing it. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like it's not a want to, it's a have to. I have to do this work because it's just something that I'm passionate about.
Find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right?
Exactly.
If your grandmother could come back today and give you one piece of advice, what do you think she'd tell you?
Just continue to be kind and do good in the world. That was really her motto, was to be kind. And I think that I live my life that way. I think she would be really proud, but I often think of her when I am just in my day-to-day life, and I think, what will my grandmother do? And what would she say? So that's in my head all the time anyway. I think that we really just, follow your heart and be kind.
Sky, if you could give the gift of health, wealth, or happiness, which one would you give and why?
If I could, I would give all three, but I think happiness is probably the most important. I think because the other two fall into line. If you're happy, then a lot of times that really feeds into being healthy. And wealth can be described in a number of ways, as I talked about. It's monetary, but it's also how happy you are. So I think happiness is really the most important thing to have in your life. Everything else will fall into place if you're happy.
So now we have a question from our previous guest.
What would you do if you knew you would be fully supported?
I feel like I do what I want to do at this point anyway, because I feel like we fully support ourselves. And I think that it's important not to rely necessarily on other people, that it really has to come from within. So I don't feel like I have ever held myself back from doing anything. One of the things that we have in terms of fear is having enough money, enough this, enough that. I've never let that stand in the way of making any of the decisions that I've made. I've always really put into the forefront, what am I passionate about and what do I want to do? And I follow that. So I can't answer that question because I don't think that I've ever stopped myself from doing something. And answering the question, it may be a roundabout way, is that I learned not to be afraid to ask for help. When I didn't know how to do something or I did need support from other people, I think it's really important to show your vulnerability, which many of us are taught never to show our vulnerability, but to show our vulnerability and saying, look, this is what I want to have happen. This is what I'm trying to do. Can you help? And you would be surprised at how many people want to be supportive and want to help. I mean, even if it's, for me, like not knowing how to make a film and not knowing how to do certain things, I would reach out to people email them, reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, I'm trying to do this. Can you help me? And it's so surprising how many people will say yes. I think the hardest part is making yourself vulnerable and having the ask. I would say the other thing that's really has been important in my life is to surround yourself with people who are supportive, who are doing what you want to be doing and doing it better so that you can learn from them and be in a supportive environment. I think it's very easy sometimes to get trapped with the wrong people who are naysayers, who will put you down. That hasn't happened in my life because have very consciously paid attention to who I want to surround myself with. But that is a very conscious thing that you have to do, is to really surround yourself with people who are supportive, who are really there for you when the chips are up and when the chips are down. Because it's really easy to be a good friend when the chips are up, not as easy when the chips are down.
Sky, thank you so much for this interview today. I am thrilled. I have been trying to figure out when I'm going to find some time. I'm going to sit down and binge watch your show because I think it's so important to tell these stories. You know, we reach that point in our life where I wish I could have my grandmother back and hear those things. And I miss her pineapple squares and her homemade buns. What did your grandmother used to make?
Oh my God, my grandmother was such a good cook. Biscotti, she made homemade lasagna, great soups. I mean, there's so many things. In fact, I did a video series of her called Cucina Nonna. That was my first foray into doing any video, where I filmed her actually cooking. And those are the things that come to mind. I mean, when I eat those things, I think of her.
Thank you again so much for your time today. I am so thrilled to share you, and I know you're out there, but to share your time with me and my listeners and my viewers too. Thank you, Sky.
Oh, thank you so much. That was just wonderful. Thanks so much.
Subscribe and click the link below to find out about bonus tracks and how to join our community.